I think the most important thing for me was just seeing that amount of support, just that red army all over the place. I remember we came into Loftus and it was like, where's all the Springbok supporters? It
Yeah.
was just red all over. And I think one of the memorable moments for me, even though I wasn't playing that specific game, was Morné Steyn getting his debut against the Lions, his debut test match, and kicking over the winning penalty in 2009 to
Wow.
clinch the series. And then 12
Yeah.
years later, he did it again.
That's crazy,
So
isn't it?
now Rassi is currently speaking to scientists at the potentially putting him in a massive cryo chamber or something to kind of like freeze him for the next few years so that he can eventually come back in 2033 to
Boom.
kick over the next winning penalty. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode on the Lessons from the Game podcast. I'm joined by my co host, Ben Pegna, and today is a special short form episode. We'll be talking about the up and coming Lions series. Ben, how's it going, man? You good? Had a great week?
Yeah, gee, seems like it's busy. Weather's improving here. I hope it is there as well. But yeah, all good, mate. What about you?
It's awesome, man. Everybody's so much friendlier at the moment in France. I think that is due to the sun being out. It's nice and warm. People can sit outside. People at the beach at the moment drinking their rosé. So everybody's happy and in
Bit
good
happier.
spirits.
Nice, man. Yeah, hopefully that happens here.
Ben, by the way, I just want to say well done on Shimi's part. That was awesome. You know, some great line of questioning there. And we also would like to thank everybody that has been listening and watching. So please, to help us grow the show, please make sure to subscribe and like our podcast and also share it with your friends. And please feel free to leave a comment on our platforms on Spotify or YouTube. Yeah, Ben, you wanted to bounce off on something about the Shimmy spot, I imagine?
Yeah, great guy. I love Shimmy. I find him infectious. You know, he's a really good guy. He's one of those guys. Like we're lucky with some of these guests. We always say it. We want them to speak for longer, don't we? But he's a legend, isn't he? And he's just. I know you guys have got great history, so I would love to just hear more about that. When I felt like we were just scratching the surface with some of the stories between you two. You know, it could have got a lot of information could have got divulged about these roomies. Yeah.
No, I was a great pod man with his posh Ronda Bosch accent. It was
Yeah.
great listening to him, and it was a great episode for me as well. You know, revisiting some old memories, things I didn't think about for ages. You know, back in the day with Kennedy Timber, Tsepo Kokali, all these guys working with Rassi back in the day. But I think it's also maybe great learning for us, Ben. We've always had a hard stop at 1 hour with the guests. You know, it's still new. We're still seeing and how we can evolve the show. But it will be great to get the feedback from the audience. Would you like us to maybe extend our long form podcast and really get stuck into it? And look, we're not going to try and go 2 hours and 3 hours, but sometimes we saw with the episodes like Shimmy and Owen Franks and even Anthony Watson, we could have really gone a bit deep. And even when Anley Murray, there were some really unbelievable guests where I do
Yeah.
believe, Ben, we could have gone so much further.
Yeah, I agree with you. Agree. I mean, when I was re-listening to Shimmy's and he said he left home at 5, that's a whole podcast there, to be honest with you. Like, left to go to school when he was 5 years old, and he went on a journey, and I'd love to know more about that pathway. Some some of those learnings.
Oh man, I can only imagine if I had to go to the hostel at the age of 5, it wouldn't have been easy for me because I was good at home, man, living with my parents and my grandparents. I was eating dinner on 2 occasions in the evening by my mom's side and then by my grandparents' side. So I was living the dream. I mean, I am the result of my efforts, clearly.
The evidence is in Exhibit A.
All right, Bim, we're mumbling about here. All right, let's get stuck to the Lions. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's excited about it. In South Africa, comes every 12 years. I've got some great memories about it. Unfortunately, 1997 didn't go so well. That was a tough one, but 2009 was epic. But what I would like to know is because, as I mentioned to you just before we got on the pod, I'm actually not that well acquainted with the history of the Lions and also why it's so important to the British and Irish people. Because, what's the difference between the British and Irish Lions and just having a barbarian team? So,
Yeah.
that now I might be stepping on some toes, but I'm really interested. Why is it really so important to you guys?
There's probably a lot of answers, but it took on a mystique and an aura. I think around 1971 and then 1974, in my memory anyway. And with videos that I watched when I was a boy that I was shown. In 71, they went to New Zealand, and Barry John and these other legends, JPR Williams, and some of these incredible players played, and they took on the All Blacks, and they beat the All Blacks in New Zealand, and it was incredible. And then in 74, they went to South Africa. Willie John McBride was the captain again. I think it was a 30-game tour, so they went for three
Wow.
months. Yeah, so these were, I think, so it's a few things. I think it's about coming together of these nations that are typical arch enemies, but they come together as brothers, and they unite, and then they fight against a common foe, and they travel the world, and they take on typically the best teams, because the Southern Hemisphere teams have traditionally been the best teams and the strongest, and they pit themselves against them as the ultimate test. And when you do that, but you're bringing together people who last week were beating each other up, for Scotland against England, and they hate each other traditionally, or Ireland against Wales, or whoever it is, but then they come together under a common captain, and they take on the likes of the Springboks in South Africa for 3 months, where it's them against the world. I think there's so many elements to it. I think one of the tours that I remember watching as a kid, I watched on the old video players, was when the Lions went to New Zealand, and it was what they called the flower bomb series. So where they dropped the flower bombs because they were apartheid protesters,
Okay.
and and the players tell the story of having to hide in the stand they slept in the stand of the stadium because they couldn't move around, but then they had to come out and play. So there's this crazy scene of this plane flying over, and as the players are playing on the field, a plane is diving down and throwing bombs of flour onto the pitch,
Okay.
and they have to get off.
Okay.
Yeah, and it keeps them going. So it's just all these things. It's just added this mystique, I think. And then, the final one was, I guess, in 1997. That was another, because people questioned when the game went professional in 1995. Will the Lions be irrelevant now? Will it
Mm.
not exist anymore? And so, 1997, you had Sir Ian McGeechan, who was a legendary Lions player. He was the coach, and he took the team to South Africa, and they made a documentary, Living with Lions, and it was an incredible documentary, incredible series, but it showed that the Lions were still relevant, and they played a proper series, so big matches against Western Province, then a test match, then against South Africa, then a test match, then against the Sharks, then another test match, then again, every week a huge game. So I think there's loads of elements to it, but it's got this history, this tradition, this aura about it. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting one this summer.
Now, for sure, I can definitely. I was 16 when South Africa lost against the British and Irish Lions. And I can tell you this, I was devastated because obviously, after watching the 95 World Cup, I was on track. I wanted to be a professional rugby player. So I was watching every single game. And what I enjoyed the most, actually, was the weekday games, the games that were playing. It was so up because back then the provincial teams in South Africa were like super loaded, supercharged. With
Yeah,
Springboks, guys were fighting for their place, and I think that's just the great thing. Guys are like fighting for their spots in the test team. But I'll tell you this: we felt that pressure in 2009 in South
yeah,
Africa. Because we had to wait 12 years to get redemption. And I can tell you that Lion series was brutal. I saw some, how can I say, some clips of um, Beast back in the day. He was killing it in the scrum, was unbelievable.
yeah,
But I think the most important thing for me was just seeing that amount of support, just that Red Army all over the place. I remember we came into Loftus and it was like, where's all the Springbok supporters? It
yeah,
was just red all over. And I think one of the memorable moments for me, even though I wasn't playing that specific game, was Morné Steyn getting his debut against the Lions, his debut test match. and kicking over the winning penalty in 2009 to
Wow.
clinch the series. And then 12
Yeah.
years later, he did it again.
That's crazy,
So
isn't it?
now Rassi is currently speaking to scientists at the potentially putting him in a massive cryo chamber or something to kind of like freeze him for the next few years so that he can eventually come back in 2033 to
Boom.
kick over the next winning penalty.
There's this. There's the solution. And you know, Rassi, all things are possible.
And I think it was a pity, speaking to a lot of players, Ben, it's a pity that the last Lions series in South Africa was during COVID. It was a very particular, speaking to some of the boys as well, South Africa would have been a great opportunity to showcase the Lions a bit more, and especially now that the game has elevated and it's really on the international stage at the moment. We're seeing massive interest from the US as well, and even you got Hollywood stars now following rugby players, which is crazy. But I think you mentioned it earlier, I think that's what I always found unique is that already playing for your country back in the day, being a traditional Bulls player, and was that one team man, and if you had to go to the Stormers or vice versa, was frowned upon. Obviously, things have changed, but already going to the box, sometimes you had to navigate that space. If you were a Stormer, a Bull, a Lion, a Shark, everybody had their cultures, their traditions, certain way of doing things, certain style. So that's always intrigued me, like bringing all those nations together. That's not easy. And having Anthony Watson on our pod right in the beginning, he shared like, who would have thought? He hardly spoke to Take Furlong during the Lions or before that. But after the Lions series, I'm not mistaken, you correct me, but they went on a trip to Vegas. How
Yeah,
crazy is
yeah, you
that?
said that. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's awesome how it works like that, isn't it? I think it just brings guys together. I think in '97 when so Ian McGeechan, I should say his proper name. he, it was the first time that they had a professional tour, and he brought in. I think he thought, okay, how can we get an edge against the Springboks? They've got like the likes of
Mm.
Osterrand, they've got Gary Teichmann, Andre Venter, just like Andre Joubert, like legends of the game, and some huge men. And he brought in ex rugby league players who had been professional for a long time. So he brought Scott Gibbs had just come back
Oh,
from
I
rugby
remember that guy
league,
was a machine at
and he
center. Oh
he
my
brought
goodness.
him into the centres, and then he brought Alan Tate in as well, and he'd been in rugby league, and then he brought a couple of other guys, John Bentley on the wing, and
Oh, I used to love him,
yeah,
man.
yeah. So when they talk about, and they talk about, that blend with guys like Lawrence Dallaglio and Jeremy Guskett in the centre with Gibbs, how you had this sort of great blend of guys who had just been in the amateur game and were bridging the professional game, and guys who'd been professional in rugby league for a couple of years, and that, they talk about how that raised the standards. But yeah, it's funny. So John Bentley, when you were mentioned the midweek games, I remember him taking on James Small against the Lions midweek game,
Yeah.
and when you watch it on the documentary Living with Lions, it's like they talk about getting the tour back on track because they'd not gone that well at the weekend or as well as they wanted to, and then they had a really good hit out with the midweek team against the Lions at Ellis Park, and it sort of got it back on track. And he scores a really good try where he takes on runs mazy run and scores. So and then make sure James Small knows all about it. So it's like yeah, so it's awesome.
No, I think it's going to be it's going to be an interesting one. I think there's a lot of I won't say controversy at the moment. Obviously, new coach of the Lions. I can imagine that's not easy. Being Andy Farrell stepping away from his duties as Ireland coach. You can definitely see the Irish team missed him. And it's definitely going to be interesting to see what style of rugby you'll be bringing to the Lions, and how you will be bringing all these great players. I mean, there's so many talented players around at the moment. You got your
Yeah,
Marcus Smith, you got all these guys, that's running amok, and you got all these unbelievable. You got Gibson Park. it's going to be a tough one to choose. I'm sure there are certain players that already solidified their place, but I think the big one, man, is going to come up front. I think that's going to be the toughest call, choosing the right props, man. And I'm telling you, I hope they get it right. I don't know what your thoughts on that.
Mate, I bounced that one straight back to you. The props, talking about props. Yeah, no,
No,
the interesting thing on what you just said. There's a few elements to it. Is the difficulty for any coaches. You have minimal time to put a team together. So do you go with guys you've worked with and that you know that they understand how you want to play, or do you go with guys who you think actually that guy's in better form, but I've never worked with him. I don't know if he'll fit into this plan, or will it all come together and gel quickly, and will we give the cohesion? So if he's the Irish coach, does he go, okay, well, the spine of the team is going to be the Irishman who I know, But if they'd had an amazing Six Nations, that would have been a lot easier for him to do, wouldn't it? But now he's probably sitting there and thinking. So, for example, Henry Pollock, who's the back rower who's ripping up trees playing for Northampton, he's played a couple of caps for England, but he's probably the form back rower, and he offers this X factor. Do you suddenly bring him into the equation, although he's never been at that level or before? So yeah,
that,
but I'll bounce the props back to you.
but before we get to the props, I think you touched on a valid point there. When it comes to the team selection, do you go on reputation and experience? You got players like Taig Furlong. He hasn't been playing a lot of rugby. I just checked that he's played like 7 games. But when he's fit and when he's good to go, top world class player.
Yeah.
When it comes to tight heads in world rugby, you got your Frans Malherbe, Taig Furlong. You got my apologies. I hope I'm saying his first name correctly. I always get it wrong. I'm always speaking to Donna Karayan and correct me, but I never get it right. So my apologies for that. And you got Winnie Antonio. You got Lomax from New Zealand. You got all these guys. I hope I said Malherbe. We need to make sure I mention that. But it's going to be interesting to see guys that are also playing in France. You've got
Yeah.
Owen Farrell, as a number
Yeah.
10, as a leader. He might not have had the greatest season with his club, but I'm sure that's not 100% on him. And then you got your man Laws pulling up trees for Breathe. So it's going to be an interesting one in terms of the construction of their team for the series.
Yeah, it's massive, and there's so many dynamics to consider. You got to consider: do I take a guy? So if you pick a guy and you think he's not going to be my test starter, and he might not even be on the bench, is he going to be a really good third choice person for the environment? Or is he going to be like a bad apple? And is he going to be obstructive, and he's not actually good for the whole team morale and the environment? Or do you take a third choice maybe who is actually going to be a really solid midweek player and he's going to be experienced? So, for example, like a Courtney Laws, you might say he's going to, he offers us versatility as a second row or back row. He's been there, he's done it, he's trusted. He's going to be a great guy in the team environment. He's going to get on with everybody. We know what we'll get from him. And he could be a midweek leader, for example, if he doesn't play in the test team, as an example, but there's loads of other really good back rowers who are putting their hands up. So it's really, really interesting from that point of view. And especially at 10, I think that comes in a lot, like, the form versus, so Owen Farrell, he's not played loads for Racing. He's the son of the coach, but he's probably the most consistent 10. And as a result, you'd think, okay, well, I'd probably back him, because I know what I'm going to get from him. And then you throw in the other sort of hand grenade is that Johnny Sexton's just been named last week as one of the coaches, the assistant coach.
Yeah.
And Johnny Sexton's publicly been more of a fan of Owen Farrell, and they get on well. And he said as much before he was named as the assistant coach that he really rates Farrell and Farrell would be his choice. So straight away, there's like all these other, the dynamic. And then if he's not going, then how does that affect Sexton coaching the other guys who do go? So there's a load of questions out there that are being asked at the moment.
No, for sure. If you have to look at the example of South Africa in the World Cup as well, when you had Mani Libbok, playing a different style of rugby and then eventually
Yeah.
bringing Pollard back in when they wanted to tighten the reins and, play a more structured game. So definitely there's some interesting chats about that. But I think which is great. I think everybody's excited and also keeping in mind, Australia, they finished quite strong end of last year on the end of year tour. They won against England at Twickenham. They won against Wales. Unfortunately, they lost against Scotland, but they were close to beating Ireland, which was, I think, a 2-point game. But Ben, where I think it's going to be really interesting, which props will be backing down for that scrum? You got names to lose it. Clearly, you got Andrew Porter, you got Ellis Genge. And then we need to throw in a bit of South African flavor there as well with Pierre Schoeman. And then on the right-hand side, you have guys like Will Stewart, you got Taig Furlong, you got Xander Fagerson, and somebody who would like to throw, well, I would actually like to throw this person's name in the hat is Carl Sinclair. Before his injury, he was pulling up trees here in France. He was doing really well for Toulon. So once again, it's going to come down to who do you select? Do you have a blend of experience or youth? It all depends on the style of rugby that you will be playing. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, nobody's going to be happy with the team that they select. But at the end of the day, Andy Farrell's got one job, and his mission is to go there and win the series. And not being a so-called Lions fan, because I've always been on the receiving side of things, but what I can say is this: I cannot foresee that Andy Farrell will be selecting players due to just preference. It will be coming down to players who can do the job, players that will be aggressive, players that can be tactically on point, and step up to the line when it's necessary, because that's always been the foundation of the teams that he has coached.
Yeah, so many good points there, G. I think, yeah, I could ask you a lot of questions about that. One thing that's going to be interesting as well, just on that last point, is that the final of the top 14 clashes with the start of the Lions tour. So if he does select anybody who's in the finals for the Lions, then they're going to have to join the tour later. So that's going to be a consideration when you consider some of the other players that are based in France who are doing well. I wanted to ask you though. I mean, what was it like in 2009 preparing? What was the mentality? Was it like this is a privilege to play? This is the ultimate, or was it? How did you guys address it?
From my point of view, preparing for that 2009 series, it was war. Because we got drilled into what happened in 1997. It was a massive disappointment for our country back then, losing. But in all fairness, back then the 97 Lions were amazing. And I remember still watching those games. It was intense, if you were like just 2 years after the game turning professional. So a lot of us that were in the Springbok team obviously followed that series because we were still youngsters. We were some of the guys were a bit older than me. They just started playing either professionally or just started playing senior rugby. So that was very important. We wanted to be a part of that. And I'll be honest with you, for us that experienced the World Cup in 2007, that was, I almost say, the same, if not bigger, very similar in terms of you want to
Wow.
be part of that team because
Yeah.
not everybody gets that opportunity to play the Lions. And
Yeah.
as a hosting country, you only have that opportunity once every 12 years. So once again, you need to prepare for that opportunity. And that also comes down to, the theme of our podcast, lessons from the game. There are a lot of players out there right now preparing. Some of them might have the last opportunity this weekend in the semi-finals in the Champions Cup to show what they are worth. But I can tell you this, there's a lot of players that have been preparing for this moment. Maybe they might not be 100% on form at the moment, but I can tell you this, when that opportunity comes and we're going to put that jump on, it's going to be on. And it's definitely
It's
going to
awesome.
be an interesting series to watch because a lot of people are writing off Australia. And I'm saying, be careful. It's going to be
Yeah,
intense.
on that one, when you look at the coaching team of, Australia, you got the likes of Joe Schmidt, but you got Mike Cron who's there, and then you got the guy Jeff Parling, who
Yeah.
who we
Yeah, you could say it, Ben. You could say it. You can announce it. Go
yeah, well,
for it.
Jeff's coming on, so we'll have a pod with Jeff coming up soon, which is going to be good. He'll give some insights into what it was like to play against Australia as a Lion in 2013, and now to be coaching against the Lions for Australia, which is a crazy situation. You asked me at the outset of this pod what the mystique and why it's special. I just remembered a story. So Ian McGeechan told me, and when he was selected for the 1974 Lions, it was a 3-month tour. So he had to go and see the bank manager and ask for his mortgage on his house to be put on hold
Wow.
while he went, because he wasn't going to be teaching, so he wasn't going to be able to pay his mortgage because it was still amateur. So can I basically go on a sabbatical for 3 months? And he had to go and convince his wife that was a great idea, and she was supportive. And then they set off, so you put your life on hold for 3 months to do the ultimate challenge of taking on the Springboks in South Africa, and it just, when you think of it, he put his mortgage on hold with the bank manager. Bank manager understood. It just adds, I think, to this mystique, but it shows you the weight and the significance to a guy like that, and to all of the sort of the rugby fraternity.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it today, the impact of social media, it's going to be intense, because you think about it, in 2021 was COVID, and if you look how things are going viral now, I think from a rugby supporter point of view, it's going to be so good to follow, because there's a lot of stories that's going to be happening, a lot of incidents, and we all know the mindset completely changes when it comes to a Lions Test match. And we all followed the one I think it was 2016 or 17, if I'm not mistaken. 2017. Yeah. We ended up in a draw.
Yeah.
Anthony Watson spoke about that one. That was a tough one. It's like, where's the extra time?
Yeah.
But Ben, we're going to wrap this up. And is there anything else you would like to add before we sign off?
I'm looking forward to talking about more as it goes on. We'll be talking about the Lions. We'll be getting some insight from guys, and trying to talk about what it means to be on the inside, and just trying to understand and keep abreast of some of the topics as well. So yeah, it's going to be exciting. The selection, I think, is it's about 3.5 weeks from now. So that's a sort of another line in the sand moment for a lot of guys that they're working towards.
No, for sure. And obviously, guys, lessons from the game is about giving insight. So we will definitely do our best to stay on topic by giving you insights, our version of how we see things. And that's what we're trying to do tonight. We do know that this is a saturated space with loads of rugby podcasts, and that's what we're about. We're here to give real in-depth insights, and hopefully we can have some guests that can share their stories, either playing for the Lions or playing against the Lions. We will do our best to get them on. I might have a special guest lined up for that, but I'm not going to spill the beans quite yet. But guys, as always, thanks for taking the time to listen or watch our podcast. Please help us to grow our show. And in order for us to do that, we need you to subscribe to our channels. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, please like and subscribe, and also share it with your friends. But most importantly, we would like to get some feedback. We would appreciate some feedback, because we want to evolve as hosts. We want to evolve as a show. So any feedback you can give, good or bad, please share it with us. All right? Because that's what Lessons from the Game is all about. It's all about evolving and moving forward and becoming better versions of ourselves. All right, Ben, thanks for taking the time in your busy schedule to join us tonight.
Cheers, Jim.
And looking for our next chat, man. And thanks for the history lesson. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, mate. It's good to chat about it.